Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's 2 p.m. local time here in New York City, and we're going to get started in a few minutes. So while we wait for everyone to log on, we want to learn a little bit more about you, our audience. So please tell us via our chat box or the chat box where in the world you will be joining us from. If you've recently gone on an interview, let us know the most difficult question that you were asked. Was your interview in person or was it remote? My name is Fatima Rodriguez, and I am the communications and recruitment coordinator here at InterExchange. As I mentioned earlier, I'm joining from New York City, and one of the most surprising questions I was ever asked in an interview was when the interview pulled out their department's brochure and asked me to let them know everything that I thought was wrong with their advertising campaign. So I was definitely completely taken back by that. But it's really good to be prepared and think on your feet. So that's something that I had to kind of like encounter. But with that, I do also want to introduce my colleague, Tammin Nicholson. He will be presenting this webinar to you all about interview tips to help you land an internship.
Hi everyone, like Fatima said, my name is Tammin Nicholson. I'm the program manager for the Career Training USA program, also based in New York City. I think the most surprising question I had during an interview was one time when I was maybe 10 years out of college and they just kept asking me questions about my college experience because that was who their clients were going to be. So they really wanted to know about what my college experience was like, which was something that I wasn't prepared for at all.
I think that's all something that we are usually taken back by when we're like brought back to our undergraduate experiences. We're kind of like, whoa, traveling back in time.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so we have a few participants that are, typing in where they're from. Right now in the chat box, we have Joseph from Canada. He said the most difficult question that he was asked was, what is my weakest skill? We also have Abby May from the UK. She wants to intern in public relations in New York City, and she actually has never interviewed before with a potential host employer. So I'm hoping that this webinar will be useful for you. Then we also have Alejandro in Colombia. He's looking for an internship in international business in Miami. And then lastly, Mathilde in France. She's from France and she wants to do a computer engineering internship in Silicon Valley. And the question that she found most difficult is, why should we hire you? Which is always a pretty difficult question to ask. And hopefully maybe we can have some tips in here for you to prepare for those types of questions. So I think just about everyone is on the line. Just a quick note, due to the size of the audience, everyone is muted, but you can use the chat feature to ask any questions that you have throughout the presentation. Additionally, this session is being recorded and everyone who is registered will get a copy of this webinar presentation after the session. And just quickly, for those of you who are unfamiliar with InterExchange, we are a cultural exchange organization based in New York City, and our mission is to enable global experiences by assisting students and young professionals from overseas to partake in cultural exchange programs in the United States. And also with that, we also want to help US students and young professionals experience programs in other countries. Now, within InterExchange, the Career Training USA program works with those seeking to undertake internships and traineeships in the United States. So for that reason, today we're going to be discussing a little bit more about what kind of interview tips that you should be aware of to land an internship in the US. And this is actually, I believe, our sixth career guidance webinar in this series of 10 that will take place every Tuesday at this time. And over the next few months, we'll be discussing a range of relevant topics such as interviewing in the interviewing interviewing to US workplace culture to developing a professional online presence. So if you're not already, I would encourage you to take a look at the remaining schedule and sign up for any other sessions that do interest you. So with that, I'm just going to pass it over to Tamin, who will discuss the interview tips to help you land an internship.
Great, thank you, Fatima. I think we can go ahead and share the presentation if we're not already. Let me just make you the presenter really quickly. Okay. Excellent. So we're going to just start with an outline of today's session. So we'll start today's presentation. I'm going to talk about the best ways to prepare for an interview. We'll talk about general tips for what to do during your interview and what not to do. We'll also talk about different techniques on how you can prepare for your interview, what you need to cover, all of the aspects that you'll need to think about the day of your interview, and we'll talk about what the interview itself might look like. We'll also talk about the differences between an in-person interview and a remote interview. There's a lot of additional considerations that you'll need to take into account as you prepare for a remote interview, which we'll go through. In the second half of today's presentation, we'll focus on common questions and the best ways to respond to some of these questions that an interviewer might ask you. And then we'll discuss proper follow-up techniques and what to do after the interview. We have a few pauses built in for questions and answers, but as Fatima said, type any questions that you do have into the chat box and we'll discuss any miscellaneous questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, so let's just get started. So how do you prepare for an interview? As we go through this presentation, the yellow slides will be mostly tips for any type of interview. Anything that's light blue and dark blue, those will be the things that are specific for remote interviews. So as you prepare for an interview, whether it's in person or remote, it's not so much do you prepare or how much do you prepare, but specifically how do you prepare. All of these are ways that candidates should use the time between when your interview is confirmed and when it will actually happen to prepare. Confirm the day and time, how long it'll take you to get to the building, get through security, how long you'll need before you leave your house, so you can be there before your interview starts, not a few minutes after or even exactly on time. You want to make sure that you're showing up with a bit of a buffer so that you're relaxed as possible and ready to start the interview. You don't want to show up 2 hours early, but maybe 15 minutes is probably more traditional to be early for an interview. Dress appropriately and for the company culture. I once had an interview where the HR manager specifically wrote that they are a casual attire office. So I wanted to dress appropriately, but I wasn't going to come in with a suit and tie if she specifically said that it was a casual attire office. So make sure that you are dressed appropriately for what you know about the company culture. If you're unsure, it's definitely best to err on the side of caution and overdress. But if they tell you in the preparation, this is how you should dress, make sure that you're reading all of that information. And that goes into probably the biggest part of interview preparation. Make sure that you research the company and you know the mission, the culture, any current events, news, staffing changes, or just staffing in general, any relevant information that you want to know, so you can ask them questions about the company that's not obvious through a quick Google search. That it shows that you've done your research and you're sure what this company does and how you would fit in. And that way you can see what their comfort level is for some of the questions that you might have that are a little bit deeper, and it'll make you stand out as a candidate when you're asking those advanced questions in an interview about how you might fit into the company culture, the job itself, the interview position, the internship position, and all of those aspects. I think most likely you will also get their business cards or get their contact information during the interview, but you also want to make sure that you're doing a little bit of that research in advance so that you can send a thank you after the interview does conclude and you're sending it to the right person and it's getting to the correct email or the correct office location. And those are things that you should prepare for any type of interview, even if it winds up being a remote interview. As far as preparation, I already talked about, you want to research the company mission, you want to research the values. If there's any professional associations that the company is part of, that you might have people in your network that might be part of those associations, or they could be associations that you follow and you might have connections. These are all excellent things to do during your research section. You should also be looking up the interviewer's background. If you know who's going to be conducting the interview, see if there's any common connections that you might have with the interviewer. If you can find on Glassdoor any interview questions that they typically ask. These are all really important aspects during your interview prep time. So you can go in and you can be as prepared as possible, that you know all about this company, all about this interviewer, all about what their interview process is. If there's going to be 3 different interviewers, or if there's going to be many levels of interviews, you've done all the research and you're as prepared as possible. Some other general tips once the interview itself starts is build rapport. Rapport is really important for a successful interview. Find a way to connect with that interviewer. And hopefully you have some ideas based on the research that you've already done. Maybe there's some professional rapport you can build with them by having similar degrees or perhaps similar focus or career paths. You might have some personal rapport. Maybe they're from the same hometown. Maybe they went to the same university as you. Be careful about how deep you go here. You don't want to build rapport by saying you follow them on Instagram and know you live in the same neighborhood or anything like that. You want to keep it a little bit more general. You might also be able to build rapport based on projects. Maybe they have similar projects as they've worked on or similar work initiatives that are the same as you, that you can have those conversations and you can build rapport one of those 3 ways. Also during the interview, make sure that you figure out a way to genuinely demonstrate your interest and your fit into both the position and the company. You want to expand outward on any qualifications that you've put in your resume or you've written in your cover letter by demonstrating that interest and that fit, why this company excites you. And be prepared to talk at length about any achievements you've put in your resume or cover letter. If you've put it in there and that interests the interviewer, they might ask you for a little bit more detail. So make sure that you're ready and willing to talk about any bullet points that you mentioned in those documents. You really want to pay attention to the aspects of your application and your resume that the interviewer focuses on. In a remote interview, you might not see as much through body language to understand if they're sitting up straighter, or if they're a little bit more excited in key portions or key things that you talk about. But you want to make sure that you can steer the conversation towards anything that they do ask you to highlight specifically, and you can speak at length if there's software knowledge that you have, or if there's projects that you've worked on that they might ask a couple of similar questions that relate to those projects. Make sure that you're really hammering home those skills that you have that seem of interest to the organization. So remote interviews and in-person interviews are two totally different types of interviews. I think that remote interviews might seem easier, but as we'll show in the next slide, they actually require a lot more preparation than an in-person interview. So now we move into some of these bluer slides, and the first 1, 2, 3, the first 5 bullet points are all the same as we saw a couple slides ago of how you prepare, but now there's all these additional bullet points you need to consider about finding an interview space, downloading the software that's going to be required for the interview, removing any distractions that you might have from the interview space, removing any clutter from your background, testing your video and testing your audio and making sure that all of that still works and is clear and they can hear you and you have the most up-to-date software that this interview will work remotely. Even if you don't meet them in person, you still will want to send a thank you, like that bullet point that I mentioned a few slides ago. So as you prepare for a remote interview, start thinking about the logistics of it. What is your location? What's the format? When will it be? And start to prepare your virtual interview room. First, it's up to you to find a space. You want to find a space that is private and quiet and free from distractions. Over the next few slides, we're going to go through a couple of scenarios of what might go wrong if the necessary preparations aren't taken. So we'll start with what happens if you don't have a quiet, private space. I think we can show this video, Fatima.
I'm putting bananas in the smoothies today.
No matter what, stay laser focused.
So it can be really hard to concentrate on an interview if you have someone calling you from the next room, if the blender is going off, if someone's sitting next to you and they're talking to you, or the TV's blaring. So make sure that you find a quiet, private location to interview. The next is having a strong internet connection. Make sure that you've downloaded the proper software and that you know how to work the software in your computer and that you have a fully charged computer. Let's see what happens if you don't have a strong internet connection in the middle of your interview.
A little about myself. Really driven.
Hey, sorry, Tim. I think you might be having some webcam issues. Kind of looks like you're whistling. Now it seems like you're going backwards. That's the first time I've seen that.
And another thing you want to do is make sure that you have no distractions, whatever. So I talked about the noise and that being a distraction, but making sure that there's no cell phones buzzing or any pets barking as you're doing your interview. Maybe put a note on your doorbell if you're expecting a package. This is what can happen if you have distractions in your room as you're interviewing.
I would be thrilled to work with you. Hey, no, dinner time's not right now. I need to do this interview so I can pay for your food.
Aw, so cute.
Fast food companies.
Number 4 is making sure that you have an organized professional space. So organize the space behind you as well as the space in front of you. We talked about removing cell phones or things like that might distract you when you're facing forward, but make sure the space behind you is decluttered as well. So you're giving as professional as a professional space as possible as if you were in an actual interview space in the organization's conference room or something like that.
People say that I'm too organized at times, and I can see where they get it. I mean, I consider myself a neat freak.
So if you're saying you're an organized person and you can see right away that there's just clutter and disaster in the background, that's not going to come off very authentic. And you should call someone before your interview actually happens to make sure that your microphone and your headphones work. There's no echoes, there's no feedback, there's no weird background noises coming through. Otherwise, you might have trouble as soon as the interview starts.
Hey, nice to meet you. How you doing? Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello?
So you want to make a good first impression and not start off right away as someone who can't figure out how to even get themselves unmuted. I think it happens quite often, but if you can skip past any of those issues, you're in good shape. And make sure that you have a proper camera angle and lighting, and they can see your face and they can see your mouth, and you're not at some awkward angle where they can't see you. Make sure you're keeping your computer propped up at eye level so that it looks as genuine as a conversation as possible.
Hey, do you mind moving a little closer to the camera? Just a little closer. I can't see.
Is this better?
Yeah,
I've been
that's better.
for 3 years now. I've had a full of.
So again, that doesn't look like a very professional angle to be doing an interview. So we're just going to go into some other general tips. Those are all ways to prepare for an interview so that you don't have those issues when the interview actually starts. But for a remote interview, similar to an in-person interview, dress professionally, head to toe, recreate exactly what the interview setting would look like. If you want to use notes or resources, that's a huge advantage of a remote interview, that you could actually have some talking points typed out, but keep them at eye level so it doesn't look that you're reading down and you're reading off notes. You can practice some of your answers and even put some reminders, maybe a sticky notes in front of you, but don't script your answers. You still want to be as genuine as possible. If you do take notes, use a tablet for writing them down. Don't type in the interviewer's ear, because it's just they're gonna hear the clicking, and it's gonna make it a little bit harder to hear what you're actually saying. If you have anything that you want to share, create a folder for relevant documents and put it on your desktop, and be prepared to share your screen if need be. But anything that might go in that folder, like your portfolio, if it's your resume, make sure that's all in one clear place if you do wind up sharing your screen during the interview. Some other general tips. First, about the video, like we saw in, I think, the 5th example where the interviewee did not unmute themselves. You want to make a great first impression. So there's no warm up for a remote interview the way there is for an in-person interview. You don't get the chance to shake their hand and walk down the hallway on the way to the conference room. Your first impression starts as soon as the video starts. So if you're a little bit early, it might feel a little bit weird, but make sure you're ready and you're smiling at the camera, and the video doesn't go on and there's an empty chair because you were off doing something else. You should make sure that you're creating as best a first impression as you can. Pay attention to your body language and your tone. You want to make sure that you're not to the point of distraction, but you're nodding, you're smiling, you're keeping a connection with the interviewer and making eye contact, not looking at yourself in the lower corner of your own video. This is going to make the interview more memorable. Stay engaged in the conversation in as many nonverbal ways as you can, because if you keep interjecting with vocal assents or whatever it might be, the audio is going to pick up what you're saying and it might cut out the interviewer. It just might feel like you're talking over them. So just keep nodding and smiling. It might be a little bit awkward because in person you might say, oh, that's right, yes, yes, but you don't want to do that if there's competing audio happening in a remote interview. And like I said, don't keep looking at yourself in the computer. It's not a mirror. You want to look at the camera so it looks like you're looking directly at the interviewer themselves. I know of a lot of people that will put a Post-it right next to the camera just to remind them, look here. Don't look down at the screen. Don't look at yourself. Don't look at the notes. Look directly at the person who's interviewing you. So I talked a little bit about audio. I'm not going to go too in-depth again here, but limit any of those extra noises. Try and limit your interjections. Don't type into the screen unless you absolutely need to. For verbal cues, try to wait a beat between when the question has been asked and when you start your answer. You don't want to overtalk the interviewer. It's, I think, a very common phenomenon as more people meet online, interview online, but just wait a second or two so that you can be sure that they finish their question. In the same way, when you're finished your question, maybe figure out a way to indicate that you're done speaking. So you might just wrap up your response with, and that's how I learned how to successfully manage events. So there's a clear ending to your question and they know that you're done speaking. And if you need a minute or two to think about an answer, that's fine, but just articulate that you need that minute or two so there's no thought that, oh, the internet's not working or there's some type of issue with our connection. Just articulate that you need a minute or two to think about that response. We're gonna stop here for any questions that have come in. And then during the second half of this presentation, we're going to talk about some common interview questions and how to best answer these questions. So Fatima, have we had any questions that have come in so far?
Yes, there's actually 3 questions that came in. The first question that came through is, what is the appropriate attire for an intern interview?
That's a really good question because you might think that an intern, given their level in the organization, might have a different type of attire that they might wear. But I would default to my original example of whatever the company culture is for attire for employees. That's what you want to match as an interviewer. You want to dress as professionally as possible within the realm of what's considered normal for the organization. So you're not going to wear a tuxedo, but you're also going to pay attention to what the instructions are in the interview. If you're unsure, I think business professional is the default way to go. I think what this intern is wearing in this picture is a great example of what you could wear even during an intern interview.
Great. And the second question that came through is, what professional background should I have for a remote interview?
There's a lot of software that will have a default remote background for you. GoToMeeting is not one of them. That's why you can see both Fatima and I's backgrounds. I think if you're using Zoom or Google Meet, I think you can just have something pretty plain, something standard that's pulled from their templates. If you don't have the option, I think something that is either a blank white wall, or maybe if you have an area of your home that has a little bit less on the wall, maybe it's just got a neutral picture, I think that's fine. In the video we saw where the person's in their bedroom and all their clothes are scattered, that's not a good example. But the less you can have, I think the better. You don't want the background to distract from what you're saying. You want to be the focus of the interviewer's attention. So even if it's a white wall, I think that's fine. But if you can find something, just a template from Zoom that's a general background, I think that's good too.
And the last question is, what if I can't find information about the company values to match to my background?
So if you can't find anything about what the company's mission is, I think there's a few general themes that most companies will have as part of their mission, or that you can weave in, things like leadership, innovation, good judgment, being resourceful, collaboration. These are all great things that you can weave into your background that might not be stated as far as the company's mission, but the ability to do all of those things, to collaborate, to effectively communicate, to be organized, I think those are all important aspects of your background that you're going to want to convey, even if you can't find the company's mission or you don't feel like they tie in directly. Those are effective tools in any position. Really, those soft skills are going to be most important.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tammin, for answering those questions.
Great. So we're going to now get into some common interview questions and how to best answer those questions. So we're going to start with what a best answer will look like. So for any of these behavioral questions, this would be when an employer asks you to tell them about a time when you had to make a tough decision, or anything that really isn't a specific answer and would require you to tell a story. So you can rely on the STAR method for these answers. You want to be clear and you want to be concise in your answer, but I think a STAR is a great way to cover both of those bases in a short anecdotal way. Most of the professional resources state that STAR method is primarily used in these behavioral interview questions, and as it suggests that it's going to require you to tell a story about a particular work situation. So you'll start with the situation. You can describe the specific event or situation, not a generalized description of what you've done in the past. Be sure to give enough details that the interviewer understands what was going on and what the situation is. It can be from a previous job, from a volunteer experience, or from a particular work event. So once you've described the situation, then tell them a little bit about the task. What were you working towards? What was the specific thing that you were trying to achieve? Then go into the action. What actions did you take to address the situation? Make sure that you're providing enough detail to keep the entire focus on you, the steps that you took, your particular contribution to this. Be careful that you don't generalize what the team did or what the organization did as part of the project, but specifically you. Make sure you're using I as much as possible. And then result. What were the outcomes of your actions? Don't be shy about taking credit for any of those successes. What happened? How did it all end? What did you accomplish? What did you learn from that experience? Make sure that your answer contains multiple positive results and use specific numbers if possible. If you can quantify something and say, my actions led to 10% growth in sales for the second quarter, that is perfect. So if someone asks you in an interview to tell them about a time when you went above and beyond to complete a project, you could say, for example, in my last position, my manager fell ill right before our annual fundraiser. So that's the situation. You can say, I volunteered to fill in and coordinate with various teams involved to ensure that the event was still a success. So I held, and that's your task of coordinating all of those teams. You held an emergency meeting with each team involved and facilitated backup plans for media relations, for guest relations, for event logistics, for budgets. So that's all the actions that you've taken. And then you can say the event was a success. It raised 20% more funds than the previous year, and you were able to enhance your knowledge in new areas of operations. There's your result. You have two different positive outcomes, one quantifiable, and you've gone through the STAR method in 5 sentences, and you've talked about a situation that you've been able to overcome, specific steps, and you've addressed a lot of the soft skills that you possess as a candidate that will be important for the interviewer. So it might take a little bit of practice to get familiar with the STAR method. It might require you to even reorganize some of your own stories and anecdotes and cut them down a little bit or tell them in a more concise way. But think you can use this blueprint for pretty much any behavioral question that you might get asked. You might get asked during an interview, on how your soft skills are going to relate to your hard skill qualifications that got you in the door. So in this next slide, I want to start going through some of the common questions that you'll likely see in an interview if you haven't come across already. And we'll discuss what that question is and what the interviewer is really asking. So we'll start with, tell me about yourself. This is they want to know what are your educational and professional backgrounds that you have that make you a good fit for the company. So see if you can sum up those backgrounds in 60 seconds or less, and make sure that you're making connections between the backgrounds that you have and the position for which you're interviewing. They don't want to know about your hobbies. The interviewer is not interested in knowing about where you grew up, but why you as a candidate are interested in this position and the qualifications you have that match that background. Number two is when an interviewer might ask why you're interested in that role. Again, now you're drilling even deeper and identifying the responsibilities that are most interesting to you and best match your background. Be sure to include in your response what you hope to learn from the position, but also what you would contribute to the organization as well. What piques your interest as an intern and makes you want to learn more from this organization, and how do you think that you can contribute to their overall mission and their overall goal? What do you know about our company is a very common question that you'll see in a lot of interviews. And this is a great place to show off all of that research that you've done and demonstrate how prepared you are for the interview. You can be able to talk about the mission statement of the company, who their biggest clients are, any recent news that you find is relevant. And this is all information that they're not expecting you to recite back to them, but to be able to talk about in a way that is intelligent and affects what your internship position will be with the organization. Another question, we ask this when we interview people at InterExchange, is what makes you a good candidate for this position? And now is when you can highlight your unique qualifications that will allow you to achieve all the responsibilities in this position. So what's unique about you as a candidate? Don't simply list all of your positive attributes. This is a way for the interviewer to get a better sense of you as a person and your communication skills. You want to be able to weave in the hard skills that you have with some of maybe the unique soft skills that would set you apart from other candidates. The quantifiable experience, how many years you have in this field, how familiar you are with the software that they typically use or similar projects you've worked on, but combine that with the qualifications that would be unique to your background, and definitely more than just the minimum baseline qualifications that are listed in the internship description. So let's move into some of the tougher questions that might require a star response. A very common question is what are your biggest strengths? And this is where you can discuss the technical skills that you have that are related to the position. Discuss any experience or skills that maybe you haven't touched on already in the interview, or you haven't been able to really draw out in your cover letter or resume that relate to the position. Provide some examples of how you've been able to use these skills successfully in the past, like we talked about a couple slides ago about quantifying some of those aspects of your resume. And if there's something that you've touched on briefly, but you know is important, or the interviewer has asked a little bit more about, it's okay to go back and give a longer star example or a star response about some of your biggest strengths and how that will relate to the position. On the flip side, a question that I think is hard for a lot of people to answer is, what are your biggest weaknesses? And the trick here is to not just focus on your weakness or your weaknesses, but how you're actively working to improve in that area. So you don't want to just say something negative about yourself to a potential employer and then leave it at that. Show that there is some progression, show that there's some improvement, show that you're aware of this blind spot and you're working towards getting stronger in that area. Maybe you're taking an online course, or maybe you've devoted X amount of hours to getting better at public speaking or data analysis or whatever it is. But show that you're working to improve that area that you've defined as a weakness. Another common question is, what do you consider to be one of your biggest personal achievements? Use this answer to highlight what interests you and showcase your enthusiasm for the role. So use this to drill down on those professional experiences and show where you've been able to thrive the most. Maybe it's in presenting at a conference, or maybe you've been able to branch off if you're in the field of marketing, and maybe you've been able to manage some events successfully, and you can show that there's crossover in 2 different fields that you have experience. And I think we talked about this before in the example of tell me about a challenge at work and how you dealt with it. This is an excellent STAR method response question right here, but you should demonstrate both how you identify a problem and how you solve a problem. In the example that I gave, I think it was pretty easy to identify the problem was that the supervisor could no longer do that position because they were ill, but sometimes the problem might not be as overt. So showing that you can identify a problem that's not as obvious is almost just as important as how you go about solving it, because it shows your organizational and your planning abilities. I think 2 more before we'll flip the script and start talking about questions that you should ask interviewers. One question that you might see is, what are you looking for in a new position? So use this to highlight the ways that you hope to expand upon the skills that you currently have and what this company does or can offer. Try and connect the dots between why this company is a natural next step for you, what your next professional step might be. If you have a goal to be someplace specific in 5 years, how will this company help you get to that level in your career, or will you be able to do it at this company? Make sure that it's evident of what your career trajectory is and how the learning of your internship will meet that. And the last one is, why are you leaving your current role? So this is a delicate response. You want to discuss what you like about your current position and your current role, but why you think that you've outgrown it and what new challenges you're seeking. You don't want to talk bad about your current company. You want to differentiate the roles and differentiate the companies and why you think this position is a little bit different or would challenge you in positive ways without showing your current position in a negative light. Even if you're very unhappy at your current position, you want to be clear in your comparison that just shows this company positively and not negative in your current position, even if it might be unstated. It might be obvious to the interviewer what you might be getting at, but you don't want to even hint that you're unhappy because your current organization is disorganized or there's issues there. So focus on the positives of what you're hoping to learn and that you can't get in your current role. So we're now going to talk about some of the best questions to ask an interviewer during your interview. So don't get to the end of the interview and get to that stage and the interviewer says, do you have any questions for me? And you say, no, I think you've answered everything. You want to make sure that you're asking questions. It shows that you're interested in the position, you want to learn more about the company, you're eager to learn. So don't let the interview finish and there's no questions that you've asked. Even if you have some questions that you come prepared with and they've answered those questions during the interview, make sure that you have some backup or something else that you can ask the interviewer. So I think these are 4 questions. If you're unsure what you might want to ask an interviewer, I would use any of these 4, maybe multiple, depending on how much time you have. But you can start by asking the interviewer to describe the work environment and office culture of the organization if they haven't already spoken to that. I think company culture and environment and the collaboration with your supervisor and your peers are all really important considerations for you as a candidate to know, but also important to show the interviewer that you're interested in knowing that and how you'll work with your colleagues and how you'll work with your supervisor. And I think in different hybrid models or remote models in 2021, this is a very relevant question. I think any interview is probably going to contain a little bit of what office culture looks like, because it might have changed greatly since the start of the pandemic. Another really good question to ask is for an example of what projects interns currently work on. You can turn this question around too, depending on what project they say, to then reinforce some aspects of your resume or your past experience. If they say that interns typically work on data analysis, you can reiterate that you've taken courses in Python or in R or different software that helps to analyze some of the things that they might be working on. So you can really use this question to reinforce anything that maybe you didn't get a chance to highlight in the previous portion of the interview. You can also ask what they think is the most challenging aspect of this position. Similar to the last question, you can turn this one around too by reminding them that you have some of these experiences and some of the skills that might help you to overcome some of those challenges. So asking them where interns in the past have struggled, or where they think that you could prepare a little bit more before the internship even starts. It shows that you're eager and you're interested and you want to succeed during this internship, but it can also be a way to just show that you are maybe more prepared, or you have skills that other candidates for the position might not have. And the last one I think ties into all of these examples actually, are what skills do they find to be most important to the position. So it draws back to your resume, it draws back to maybe why they have brought you in for an interview. It's a great way to end an interview too, because it ends with you getting a chance to just reiterate the skills that you have, and them, even if you don't have the chance to reiterate all those skills, they might start listing things that they remember are on your resume or in your experience. So it's a great question to end an interview with if you're getting the chance to ask the interviewer some questions. There's plenty more that you can ask too. If these are all asked or answered during the interview itself, you can ask them about what is the typical career path for interns in the organization. If they do become hired as employees, what are typical responsibilities on a day-to-day level of interns? What are the next steps in the interview process? That's a question that should not go unanswered by the end of the interview, so you know what to expect. But there's plenty that you can and should ask an interviewer. So make sure that you seize that opportunity when they ask you what questions you have for them. But there are quite a few questions that you don't want to ask. So these are important questions to just write off now and know that you should not be asking during an interview. First, that you shouldn't ask, what does this company do, or anything general like that. You should know all of this because you've done plenty of research. And if you're asking what the company does, it shows that you either haven't done research, or you don't know what you're applying for, or you're not organized enough to even keep track of which of the companies you applied for offered you an interview. So you don't want to ask any of those general questions that are clear and they're answered by a quick Google search. If there's any specific areas of the department or new projects, or maybe there's a new grant that they have that they're working on a whole new team, you can ask some specifics there. But you again want to preface it with that you've done your homework, or that you've seen that they have a new project or a new initiative that they're working on, and what do they think the goal is going to be from that project. So make sure that you're not asking those general questions that anyone can find the answers to. You also don't want to start asking questions about salary and benefits during your interview. I think it's too early at that stage to start asking about all of those additional aspects. You're focusing on the position. You as a candidate, you can certainly talk about salary and benefits later on in your offer, or if they bring it up, you can answer what your desired salary might be, but you don't want to initiate that conversation as part of an interview. How quickly can I get promoted is another question that's really not a good question to ask. Even if you're an intern and it's a 6-month program and you think that maybe you want to come back to your home country and work for this organization, it could be a great career stepping stone to do this internship, but you don't want to start showing in the interview that you're already thinking about the next opportunity, or that you're already onto the next project. You want to focus on what it is that you're applying for in the position that you're currently seeking, and not what you're going to be doing immediately after this. You can talk abstractly about your career goals, but not how quickly can I get out of this position and into something higher. That's not a good question to ask. And anything that's already been answered, like I said, if you have questions that you want to ask and they answer those questions during the interview, don't ask those questions again at the end. Make sure that you have new questions that you can ask. It just shows that you're not paying attention, or you didn't listen to them if you're asking something that's already been answered. I think it's really important to peak at the end of your interview so they have a very favorable impression of you as a candidate when your interview does end. So don't try and stump them. Don't try and ask anything too technical. Make sure that you're peaking and they have the most positive review of you at the end of the interview. So once the interview ends, again, this is yellow. This is for everyone, whether it's an in-person interview or a remote interview. Send a personalized thank you. Follow up any of the conversational points that you talked about that you think are important. This thank you letter can be via email, can be a note. Make sure you get it out about 24 hours after your interview happens. If you know you have a bit more time before they make a decision, then you can definitely send it via post instead of email. But if you think they're going to make a decision quickly, I would shoot them an email with the thank you in it, just so they have it immediately after. You can also ask for updates, but check back in when it's appropriate. So if they say they'll have a decision by the end of the week, it's okay to check in the end of the following week. If they say that they have 15 more candidates and they're not going to have a decision to the end of the month, you don't want to check in until after the end of the month. Make sure that you're showing that you're paying attention and you know what it is they're seeking and you know what their timeline is and you're able to respect that. And if you don't get the position, remember that there's plenty of future opportunities. So you want to maintain a positive network. You want to maintain contacts with this organization for your own professional development. If there's any additional skills or experience that they say they would have hired you or given you the position had you had, go out and work on those skills and experience and try and build your candidacy so that next time there's an internship cycle, you can apply for it and get that internship position. So the end of the interview is not the end of your connection with the interviewer. It's not the end of your connection with the organization. Take those steps afterwards to follow up and stay in the back of their minds, even if this specific position is eventually not something that you're able to get offered. So some key takeaways for interview preparation. Well, first of all, it's essential. Preparing for an interview is maybe just as important as the interview itself. So research the company and research the interviewer and make sure that you're prepared to speak about what it is that they do and how you connect with that company and how the skills and expertise that you have are good fits. Make sure that you've thought through all of the logistics for an interview, especially if it's a remote interview, that you're not wasting time getting your audio set up or that you're not wasting time trying to figure out how to log in. Test your software, test your space, test your lighting so that you can focus the interview completely on you as a candidate and not all of those additional logistics. Another key takeaway is using the STAR method. So for any behavioral question, prepare succinct anecdotes to talk about and match those anecdotes to the company values. Prepare questions to ask the interviewer. And last but not least, send a thank you regardless of whether it's in person or remote interview so that you leave a positive feeling with that interviewer at the end of your interview. All right, so that is the end of our presentation on interviews. We have more webinars coming up. We have 3 more next month. So if you have any questions about interviews, type them into the chat box and we will answer those before we log off today. But I just want to plug our next 3 webinars. Next week, we'll talk about US workplace culture. In 2 weeks, we have a session on English in the US workplace, and we'll go through a bunch of different business idioms that you might hear in different aspects in your internship. And our last session will be a webinar with a panel of current and alumni who have interned in the United States from France, from South Korea. We have a Slovakian participant, so a variety of different countries and fields, think architecture, business, political science, so a lot of different aspects that they can speak to about interning in the United States. And if you missed any of our past webinars, you can check them out by going to our YouTube page and looking at some of those past topics that we have talked about. I'm gonna leave our contact information up there. But Fatima, do we have any questions before we wrap up this presentation?
Yes, so we actually have 4 questions that came through. The first question is, what do I do if I don't know how to answer a question?
So if you don't know how to answer a question, I would first ask for a little bit more time to think so that you can think through what the question is and make sure that you fully know that you don't know. But you can also ask them to rephrase the question too if you're a little bit unclear of what it is they're asking for. If they're asking for an anecdote or a specific answer. And even after they're rephrasing and they tell you the question again, you're still unsure how to answer it. I would focus on what are the key words that you hear in there. Are they asking for an example? Are they asking for something that's a yes or no type question, so that you can at least get a sense of what they're going to want to hear from you story-wise. But if you absolutely don't understand, it's okay to ask them. I don't understand that question. Can you rephrase it a little bit? Because there might be some idioms they're using in the question and not even be aware of it.
Great, thank you. The second question is, what if my questions have already been answered?
So like I said, if your questions have already been answered, then you're going to want to ask new questions, and you want some backup questions in case they do answer your questions. Maybe your question's been answered and you don't have anything else that you can even think about asking the interviewer. Go back to what that question is and try and dig a little bit deeper. So if your question is about workplace culture and they answer a little bit about workplace culture, but they don't talk about what the future might look like if they're returning to the office 100%, you can dig a little bit deeper into that specific topic, but you don't want to just say, oh, well, tell me about workplace culture if they've spent 5 or 10 minutes already telling you about their workplace culture. But you can ask a little bit more, you can ask for a little bit more specific information. My advice would be to have a long list of potential questions that you could ask and just pick and choose from there depending on where the conversation goes.
Thank you. And then the third question is, how long should a STAR response be?
I think 5 to 6 sentences, maybe 30, 45 seconds, 60 seconds, depending on how long the story needs to be. But you really want to make it as succinct as possible. Everyone speaks at a different pace, but I would focus on those 4 components and not give more than 6 seconds to than 6 sentences to your response, and don't make it a long story. Make it a quick anecdote that gets to the point and shows them what it is they're asking for.
Great, thank you. And the last question that was asked is, how long should I wait to follow up after an interview?
Yeah, this is another one that's going to depend on the timeline of the host employer, and that's a question that you hopefully will have the answer to by the end of the interview of what the next step is going to be. So if they tell you that there's going to be a response by Friday, it's okay to follow up the following week and ask for a little bit more details. But if they say that they still have a long way to go in their process, then you're going to need to give the company a little bit more space. And I know that's hard as an interviewee. You're very eager to hear their decision. But if they have more candidates to bring in, you probably aren't going to hear right away. So this is something that you hopefully have the answer to by the end of your interview. But if you're unsure of what the next steps are or the timeline, that's another great question to ask your interviewer.
And that's all the questions that we have for today. Thank you so much, Tammin, for providing us with so many information about interview tips. I think it was definitely really helpful. I know you covered a lot of information with that.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon or evening, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Bye, everyone.